Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. I'm Andia, a licensed addiction counselor, and along with my co-host, Laura Kissman, a quantum nutritionist, we will be inviting expert scientists, clinicians, survivors, and thrivers to distill their pearls of wisdom attained from applying quantum biology to their fields of research and everyday lives. Our goal is to bring you easy to understand principles and practices about the study of light, water, and magnetism so you can take your health into your own hands. This episode is sponsored by Viva Rays, the only eyewear company that truly understands your biology. Viva Rays are advanced blue light glasses designed with circadian biology in mind. Unlike typical blue blockers, they filter light in harmony with your body's natural rhythms, helping you sleep deeper, feel more energized, and protect your long-term health. We love companies that support biology-backed wellness, and Viva Rays is leading the way. Use code QuantumHealthy at vivarays.com to save 15% and support your sleep, focus, and natural energy the way nature intended. Enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Quantum Healthy. We have Scott Zimmerman today, and he is an optics engineer with over 35 years of experience in the industry and over 80 U.S. patents. His innovations and inventions have been used successfully in a wide range of military and commercial products that include night vision displays, liquid crystal display, backlighting designs, and lighting fixtures. And in the last decade, Scott has turned his attention to how light interacts with the body. This led him to becoming an expert on physiology of melatonin and how near-infrared and infrared light propagates through living tissue. And he's the founder of Nira Lighting. Welcome to our podcast, Scott. We're so excited to talk to you today.
Well, thank you. And as I said, I will make my disclaimer. I am not a doctor. I just make suggestions, and I suggest people look at the literature if they really want to know what's going on.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. This is for educational purposes only. So why don't we start with just how you ended up studying light and how it impacts our biology?
Well, it's kind of a circuitous route. I started out that I was a mechanical engineer, and then they needed somebody to do some work for displays and optics and set up equipment. So I started building equipment to measure optics or measure light sources and displays and it turns out I was developing for night vision type applications, which is all in the near infrared. So for me, it was kind of like second nature that did a number of different ideas. They took me back to a research center, and I worked with some amazing people, 350 PhDs, and I was the engineer wandering around trying to understand what they were saying, and but it was had a very diverse set. So I call myself more of a generalist. Then a lot of people are very focused in one very narrow area. I try and be a little bit broader in how I look at things. And then, I've been lucky enough that we started a little company. We're the only U.S. manufacturer of screw-based light bulbs left in the United States. And we're just a small little company. And I made a promise. My granddaughter has been dealing with neuroblastoma. And so I kind of got into that this was something I really wanted to understand how light might be able to do something with it. And that's it's kind of led to where I'm at. So we're kind of a little company that is trying to do good science and make enough of a profit to keep going type thing.
Yeah.
So it's hard
Is she
because
okay?
yeah, she's in remission at this point. So we'll see how it goes. But it's hard because it's very hard to do any work involving children, especially with that kind of stuff. So it's very difficult to get any real traction. Most of the drugs that are used by children are kind of hand-me-downs from the adult studies. And so, light and things like that are never included in any of their studies. So, so anyway, but that's kind of where we got to where we're at. And I've been extremely well blessed to work with Glenn Jeffrey and Bob Fosbury over in England, and some others, and Roger Swelt. And we've done a series of podcasts and things of that nature. And Bob and I been doing a lot of different work in different areas. He's actually going to give a talk at Parliament over some of the work that we're doing. So,
That's
you know,
amazing.
yeah.
Sorry,
And
Scott, our listeners won't know who they are. We
Yeah.
we know. Could you just
oh,
kind of highlight what each of them do? Are they, one's an astrophysicist?
yeah, Bob's an astrophysicist. And so we got this kind of like odd grouping of optical engineer and astrophysicist who designed stuff, the Hubble and other space telescopes. And he's a emeritus, amazing, brilliant man. And then Glenn Jeffrey is a neurobiologist that did some of the original aging studies on various, like on flies and things of that nature. And now he's doing work with humans and showing that light has a big effect. And hopefully, here in the not too distant future, he's going to be publishing some really remarkable data that says that, hey, maybe we need to take light into account because it may be changing some of our basic physiology inside the body.
Wow.
So, hopefully that'll get some traction and people will start thinking about it. It's hard because for whatever reason, light is always last on the list. You talk to the people about the blue zones, and they'll talk about food, and they'll talk about the camaraderie and the whatever, but they never mention sunlight. And it just turns out that those blue zones are in some of the most, they're at 14 or 17 north and 37 north latitude, so they're in this kind of like beautiful area with lots of green plants and that are reflecting near infrared into you, and yet that's not discussed as a possible issue, or why we want to get the right spectrum for people. So
And also that they can be outside more. Like from where
yeah,
I am at the 45th latitude, like it's even today I could have been, if I dressed more, I could have been outside, but
yeah, no,
I would have had
I
to wear a lot
totally
of
agree.
clothes.
And it's not like it's hard because it's not like it's something that's just going to kill you tomorrow. This is something that over time works its way up and causes problems for you. And you always wonder, well, what happened? Why did I get this? Well, maybe it's because you didn't stay linked in with nature as much as you should have, you know?
Mm.
And it's really hard for a lot of people. Had a really interesting conversation with a group that was trying to deal with battered women. And I had never really thought about it, but they feel trapped in their homes because they're afraid to go out. So they don't get the kind of exposure that they need, even for them or their children. So we
Mm.
were talking about maybe you need a conservatory up on top of the building that they can go out to and get a little bit of sunshine safely or something. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
You,
amazing how we've gone to such a small amount. 93% of our time is spent indoors. So,
yeah.
so anyway.
Well, you also have worked with Russell Reiter, who we've actually invited. We have not heard from him yet, but he specializes in melatonin. So wanted to just kind of jump into that topic. And most people think of it as the hormone of darkness.
Yeah.
And we know that there's way more to it than that. So can you talk a little bit about melatonin you that you discovered when you wrote about it in the melatonin and the optics of human body, and then the two other papers related to melatonin and just that connection to near infrared light.
Yeah. Well, what happened was is that Russ has got 100,000 citations, been looking at melatonin for 40 years. He's the world's expert, in my opinion. And I was looking around to try and understand what the effect of near infrared would be on the body. And I was talking to Russ, and Russ said, I showed him some of the optical models I had made of the body because you'd think that after all these years we had knew how light propagates in the body. And it turns out we don't. And so the paper was really written around the optics of the body and how it could possibly be generating things on melatonin. Now we know, based on further study, we know that melatonin is being increased in all our cells based on sunlight, based on exercise, based on all these things. So it kind of like was, and Russ has been trying for, like I say, 40 years to convince everybody that melatonin is actually generated not just in the pineal gland, but is also generated in all your cells. And you can only see it in transient responses. And in other words, if you do something, you go outside and you run, you'll see if you were actually had hooked yourself up to a catheter and you were taking samples of your blood on every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you'd find that melatonin goes up like this, plateaus, and you quit running, goes down. Cortisol goes like this, goes across, but it starts to taper off because melatonin is actually dropping the cortisol levels. So it's trying to push the thing. So there's all these mechanisms that are in the body that we really don't understand. And they're all tied in with trying to maintain some kind of homeostasis. Something gets a little out of whack, something goes over here to pull it back down.
Mhm.
And we don't think about that and we don't measure. Most of the research out there, they'll go and measure cortisol at some point in time, and then a day later they'll measure it again. And the same thing with melatonin. And what they were doing is they were missing that this stuff was changing rapidly, and that was what was really more important than where the average was going in. And as we talked about earlier, I mean, I believe very strongly that what we've done is create an environment that's very cortisol rich. For children in particular, they get overstimulated. We have all these, they're watching TV, they're getting all this stimulation and driving cortisol levels up, but we're doing it in an environment that doesn't allow the melatonin to correct it. So, I mean, and same thing goes with people with addictions. If they are sitting there and they're trying to recover, having cortisol spikes all the time are causing them to have high levels of cortisol may not be helping them on their recovery. And they may be more likely to fall back into some kind of a problem. It didn't get them addicted in the first place, but it's keeping them addicted is what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, yeah.
That was,
Laura wanted to highlight the children. Laura, do you want to just bring that up now?
yeah. So I just want to go back a little more basics before we go there.
Yeah.
Why is it that was profound what you just said. Why is it that the light, like what if they're indoors and they're trying to heal from addiction, let's say, or kids on their screens and or in this all this blue light, why is it that they can't make the melatonin?
Because you're not the things that stimulate melatonin are exercise, light sources,
Right.
things of that nature, cold plunges, things of that nature
Right.
cause a spike in melatonin. Now, do we understand how it's all doing? No, we don't. But we do know that melatonin has a bunch of beneficial effects, and people they it's so focused right now on circadian and how your body responds as a function of time of day and the melatonin going up. But what we're not doing is the understanding that melatonin is being generated all throughout the day and also at night. The reason melatonin was chosen for the pineal gland and why it's so important for all our cells is as Russ will tell you, it's the oldest and the best antioxidant that we have in our body. So it basically deals with the reactive oxygen species that we're getting from doing life. I mean, you don't want to just sit on a couch all the time. You're going to get up, you're going to walk around, you're going to go outside, do those things. The body's constantly adjusting for that. And in certain cases, melatonin wins. I'll use some practical examples. How many times have you gone on to the beach and you sat on the beach and you come back and you say, why am I so tired when I get off the beach? Well, it's because you've had a melatonin uptick and it takes a while for it to get out of the system. Same thing happens with exercise. You do a really great run and you'll maybe I feel kind of tired at the end, or you eat a big meal. There's all these different stressors that we don't totally understand, but you see the effect in how in because melatonin takes quite a while to clear out of the system, because it's essentially consumed. So what you do and how you do it afterwards has a big effect on what your instantaneous melatonin level in the body is. And that's what I thought was really so interesting working with Russ is that, he basically said, Scott, we've been doing this stuff with melatonin and cortisol and all these things for years, but we never added in the optical component, the light component. And so what the problem you have is with so many of these studies is that if you don't include all the important variables, you don't get the right result, the real answer. And that's what's been going on, I think, in a great extent with our understanding melatonin.
Yes.
Russ takes a lot of melatonin. I do not. I believe that you go outside, go do some exercise, do some light, get in light. That's what I think is a better approach.
Yeah,
But
I say if you make it, don't take it kind of mentality.
yeah,
So I want to ask a question just for kind of also wrapping up for our listeners, because we know that artificial light at night is going to suppress melatonin and it's not going to be released. So we want to protect, how we can. Now, if it's daytime and you are under artificial light, is it suppressing that melatonin that would normally come and combat that cortisol?
well, it's not helping it, that's for sure. You
Okay.
know, but I would argue that you know, like I say, the problem is this the body's adapted to quickly respond to like a flash of lightning, or a tiger's going to jump out at you, or whatever, the fire's coming, some event, some stressor. And the main response is first adrenaline, and then it comes into cortisol. Cortisol, there was you probably appreciate that there was a really interesting study where they took addicts that were addicted to cocaine,
Mhm.
and they brought them in, and they looked at the time response in the blood of the various different hormones. And so they gave them a hit in this particular experiment.
Mhm.
And then they watched the cortisol levels and all the adrenaline. And you saw this immediate spike in adrenaline. And then they also measured euphoria for the particular, for cocaine, I guess it was. And it dropped off in about 30 minutes. But the cortisol just hung in there and went out only got to about 50% after a couple hours. So cortisol tends to be, unless you have something like melatonin to drive it down, it tends to hang in there over a long period of time. And that's what I'm concerned that, someone who has an addiction, they're not going to, they cause the addiction. I got that, but maybe they're not in the best environment to help them get through it without having this extra cortisol all the time.
Yeah, no, that's huge. That means addressing the light environment or getting outside more
I
could
definitely say outside.
turn to use, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what we're finding is it's becoming more of a balancing act. I mean, there are thousands of processes going on in your body at the same time. Light's coming in to the body. The body is using that light to do a wide range of different things. And so having all of a sudden now, we took away 90% of the solar spectrum with our indoor lighting.
Mhm.
It used to be we had, this. We're now down and doing this. And the idea that that doesn't cause a problem is kind of stupid in a lot of ways. And it's not bearing out with what we're doing. Now, everybody did it for a good reason. They were trying to save energy, but they haven't even really saved that much energy, because what went along with that is we lack the ability to dim lights down. So what you'll find is a lot of LEDs either don't dim or they dim very little. And they sure don't shift into the infrared. Right? They don't have any content in there. So it's really hard to create that warm, glowing feeling at night, while you're by a fireplace or by candlelight or whatever.
Mhm.
You feel that. And it's actually affecting your melatonins. So,
Oh,
Get
wow.
so sleepy by a campfire,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not rocket science. It really isn't. It's just
No.
hard for a lot of people to. I mean, we've opted into comfort over the better thing for your health, and I don't know how you solve that all the way, because people deserve to be in a nice warm spot with night, but it's our cooled spot. I'm not a big air conditioning fan, so
When
anyway,
if we could talk about kids,
yeah.
because obviously you've got grandchildren and kids, obviously yourself, but how is so all this artificial lighting, right? All the screen time, the lack of sunlight. it's obviously affecting our kids. I was reading your paper, The Melatonin and the Optics of the Human Body. You highlighted a couple things in there. One was more than 7 hours of artificial visible light exposure was found to cause cerebral cortex thinning. I think you were highlighting other people's research. This was not your own research. Yeah, and then you also mentioned an increase in rickets, which is typically associated with the vitamin D exposure. Is there
Yeah, well, I
hope for
mean,
our kids?
I think vitamin D is probably one of the most misunderstood thing in my opinion,
Mhm.
because it's one of those very unique things optically. Because what we know is that that there's studies out there done by Hudson and others that the near infrared and the far infrared are generating are localized in the very outer part of your skin. Bear in mind that, sorry if this gets a little technical, but
Sorry.
in the skin, most of the wavelengths that are associated with making vitamin D and all the stuff that goes on occurs in a very thin layer on the outer part of the skin, about 50 microns to 100 microns thick. Okay. There are two places in the solar spectrum where that localization occurs. It's in the UV and it's in the infrared. And so what ends up happening and what the studies show is that the infrared component generates hydrogen peroxide in that outer thing. And just like bleaching your hair, it's very hard to bleach melanin, which makes our skin pigmentation, by just photons. That's what it does. It works very well at doing that. Add a little bit of hydrogen peroxide to it, it bleaches out quite readily. So what it appears is that different parts of the spectrum are working together to make it so that you're more efficient at generating vitamin D by photo bleaching out that little portion of the skin. And therefore that then allows you to make cortisol, it allows you to make testosterone, it allows you to make all these different things that we used to when we were outdoors, was doing it at a higher efficiency than we are now indoors, because we don't have this cooperative effect associated with the different parts. And optically, it's really amazing because those two regions are the only places in the visible and in the near infrared. Light goes into the body, bounces around or reflects off or things of that nature. But in those two wavelength ranges, it's very localized. The highest energy photon density in the body occurs in the infrared, and it is generating hydrogen peroxide, and it is helping. You look at people's hair, what happens? They turn gray,
Mhm.
and it appears, well, at least you've got some.
I'm
So the
definitely
point
thankful.
being is that there's all kinds of mechanisms that are going on that are just not, everybody tries to come up with this magic wavelength or this magic whatever. The reality is the body is exposed to all this simultaneously. It's using some portions of the spectrum to work with other portions of the spectrum to get a particular effect. And when we start screwing around where we get rid of big chunks of it, then we essentially prevent or degrade the body's ability to do what it, because it's made an assumption. It assumes we're under sunlight. Why would it make any other assumption?
Right.
You know?
Mhm.
And I'm afraid that you could almost look at it now that what we're doing is we're very rapidly, something that took millions of years to develop, we're now very rapidly altering it to the point that our children are, in a lot of ways, adapting to a whole new environment that we may not like the results when we're done, type thing,
Mhm.
and again, the solution's pretty simple. It's cheap. You got to find a way to go outside and you got to go hang under a shade tree, build a tree house, do whatever for children.
Mhm.
Let them run around barefoot a little bit, that it's not the end of the world. And, but it's very clear to me that the reason I can focus on children besides my granddaughter is that optically children, photons go farther into the body than almost 100% of their shells get absorbed, are exposed to near infrared. I don't know if your viewers have ever got to see Bob Fosbury's picture where he took near infrared and put his hand on it, all over it, and you can see all the way through his hand with a camera picture of it. And you just see the few of the vessels, but you don't see the bones. It's just all transmitting and bouncing around inside you.
Mhm.
And that doesn't occur anymore indoors at all. And the idea that that doesn't have a health effect is, I think, wrong. So,
Wow.
and in fact, I'm enjoying a little few raindrops right now.
So let's talk about the sunscreen effects. So near infrared photons provide up to an SPF 15 level of skin protection and also protects from blue burns from LEDs. So Laura and I really wanted you to explain blue burns to the
Oh,
audience because
well, I'm going to explain it, and everybody can laugh at me for doing it. But
Okay.
I made a light source, and I was portable, so I could carry it around. So I had it in my hand at a conference show or whatever, and I had my thumb up against the light source, and it just wasn't cold. It was cool. It was an LED. It was nice and cool. I
Yeah.
wandered around, kind of like a linear strip thing. And after the time I felt something funny on my thumb. And literally what I found is that about 2 or 3 days later, about a millimeter thick of my skin actually peeled off, associated with the fact I'd gotten a blue burn. Now, people always say it's UV that causes all the problems. Well, you can get burned just as easily with a blue or green. It just takes more energy to do it. And if you look at the dentist shops, they have exactly the same issue because a lot of them are using blue light, high intensity blue light, to cure some of the dental work. And
Mhm.
the dental society has actually instituted restrictions on how much exposure the dentist and the assistant gets over time, because they're afraid that it's going to cause some issues. So I mean, there's no magical thing that happens when you go from violet to blue, other than the fact that, or green or yellow, other than that your eye responds to it. But that is such a narrow band of the spectrum that the other ones are playing a role too and have different effects. I don't
yeah.
know if that answers your question, but right.
Well, it was very, that's very good news that near infrared light actually provides some protection. And then I know that, it penetrates the skin more deeply. And with blue, there's no, like with the sun, we're outside too long. And what happens? We get a little red, we get a signal, we get warm, we go inside or we seek shade. But if you're
Right.
sitting in front of a blue light all day, like many of us do, because we're working on computer screens, it's not like we're getting the blue burn signal, like a, hey, you've had too much blue light today. You should probably go outside, or like that would be the appropriate signal we would love, right? If nature worked that way. But we're not getting that because it penetrates all the way down, I think, to the fat where there's no nerve endings. So there is no signal of that blue. And
Well, yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, the the sunburn was there for a reason. Said tell you that, hey, dummy, you got to go in.
Mhm.
So many of these sources are very high intensity, but you don't have any of that effect, or as much of that effect going on. It will eventually cause it, but in my particular case, it literally took 2 or 3 days for me to notice that, hey, why is this big part of my skin coming off? And it was very thick. And what was amazing was the thickness. If you calculate the penetration depth of blue, it was the thickness that came off of my skin.
Wow.
So it just further illustrates that we need to take the power of light into account. And it's one of my big pet peeves right now. I'm very hopeful that RFK Jr. will do things to do something with the food supply, but
Hmm.
they need to focus on the lighting part of this thing as well. And
Thank you for
for
saying that.
whatever reason, it's very hard to get people to really understand that it's a huge. I mean, when you look at just from a pure amount of power, joules rate, your body can be exposed up to 30 megajoules per day. That's a big number. You look at it from the standpoint of when you're inside, you're talking about a few kilojoules, type exposure level that you're getting. And if you look at it in comparison to food, it's twice as much as what the energy that we get from sun. It can be twice as big as the energy we get from food.
Mhm.
So, you know, I think we don't have a good, for whatever reason, sunlight is not considered. I think it's probably because people think that it's just a given, but I don't think they really realize how much we have moved our way away from that, especially with some of our elderly. There was a study that showed that some of the elderly only getting 5 minutes every 2 months of sunshine.
I
What?
heard you say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard you. I thought yeah, I remember you saying that.
5 minutes
Yeah,
and
well, I mean,
yeah.
there are people who can't get out or very easy. And that was the thing that was so amazing with Roger's work is Roger's board certifications. And he took,
Sorry, Roger Sahult, is that how you say
yeah, Schwelt, I think is the way.
Schwelt. He's a
Yeah, I
medical
think that,
doctor. Yeah,
yeah, he's an emergency medical room,
doctor.
pulmonologist, sleep expert.
Okay.
And what he was looking at the rest of the paper, Russ and I, and he did a video on it, got so it had like 2 million views or something like that. And but what he's been doing is putting his mouth where his, where whatever. But he's going,
Money.
he took he had some COVID patient in particular that was struggling to get off, was going to have to be intubated. He said, asked him if it'd be possible they could go outside. Took the patient out, a lot of work, took the patient outside. The guy said, oh, this isn't going to do anything. Basically, he came back in. He said, I feel so much better. In a matter of days, he was back on his thing. I mean, Africa, people take their sick out into the sunlight for a little bit every day.
Yeah.
There's so many indications that, you know, having the right solar spectrum or exposure for even a brief amount of time. That's what's going on with Glenn's work.
Yeah.
He's showing that it doesn't take very long to make a big difference. And that's what if nothing else comes to this thing, I hope people will start thinking about
Mhm.
how they spend their time. Maybe it's time to go out and sit on the porch for lunch or something like that. It doesn't have to be in direct sunlight. It can be in indirect. In fact, indirect's better. And, or that type of stuff. And, it just should be part of everybody's regimen. My wife and I, we have tell you kind of nuts we are. We have one of those little enclosures that has the clear glass or clear plastic on both sides that you go when you go watch your kids do soccer. And we'll go set that out there in the middle of winter. And it could be 20 degrees outside, but it'll be 80 degrees in that little enclosure with the sun's out. And my wife hated winter, always hated winter. And she's a whole lot better when we do that. So, there's lots of simple solutions that don't mean you have to go spend a bunch of money.
Yeah.
So,
Especially when it's in the conversation and we're thinking about it more, then you'll start to think of these things. And I was going to ask you like how much knowing what you know and the research you've done with melatonin with all the lighting, like how much has it changed your life and lifestyle, And it sounds like yeah, you're sitting
um,
outside right now and you're,
no,
you've got this
I would say
enclosure.
that I'm a work in progress from the standpoint
Yeah.
of, I know what I know, but I think I'm like most people. You want the comfort. Do you really want to go out and exercise that much? I mean, I think I represent about 50% of the population, that is still struggling with how do you deal with weight? How do you deal with a lot of things?
Mhm.
But I think, like you said, the more we talk about it, the more people get involved in looking at it. I'm excited because all these new biosensors, the glucose monitors and all that other stuff is coming on to where people can see in real time what their actions are causing.
Mhm.
And, my situation and a lot of people's situation was defined 20 years ago. You know, how we deal with it now is hard, but I'm slowly working down. I'm using my light budget to try and encourage myself to lose some weight. And but I think I spent 40 years sitting underneath inside doing research on in an environment that wasn't, in my opinion, healthy for me.
Mhm.
And it takes a lot to get away from that. So I would never give anybody a hard time about anything, be it weight or drug addiction or anything like that, because what we've been doing to everybody, in my opinion, has been setting people up for failure. That's what I think.
if we could talk about what I would call the ultimate, well, the ultimate failure is death, but maybe back up a step to cancer. We've had a couple podcasts recently on cancer. It's something that I've heard you highlight, just talking about back to skin cancer and basal cell. Can you talk to us
Yeah, I
about?
mean, first off, they had this really great study out of the Rogers put out or showed that women in Sweden, they did a long, big, large study, and they were able to show that women who spent time outdoors compared to the women that didn't spend time outdoors were may have a slightly higher risk of getting melanoma, but they had a much lower risk of getting all-cause mortality. They lived longer
Mhm.
if they did get melanoma, number one. Number two, they also had less cancer, had less other things that go along with it. So sunlight is providing it's been demonized because it does increase your level of getting some cancers, so basal and melanoma,
Squamous.
squamous, and
Squamous,
all
yeah.
those. But it is pretty clear that you're more likely to live if you've had continuous exposure and recover than people that are don't get out, and that makes them more susceptible. Optically, it's really interesting to me because when you start screening out the UV using sunscreens, it takes away, as we were talking about,
Mhm.
takes away your ability to have that signal that you're going to get sunburn, that you've been out too long.
Yeah.
And the sunscreens don't block any of the blue. So
Right.
what happens is
Thank
that
you.
you don't have the alert. You may not get the melanoma because of the UV, but you're more likely to, over time, get the basal cell. And basal cell is 95% of the skin cancers that we get. In fact, 90 some odd percent of the cancers that are in the body. But it was pretty clear that when people started doing sunscreen, they were setting the public up for a situation where they may spend more time out in the sun under blue, which then optically couples down into, it turns out that if you do the optics, you measure, model the effect, most of that blue light is localized in the basal cell region of the skin. So it kind of just makes sense. The problem is, in order to fix the basal cell, you have to add in enough pigmentation that makes everybody look like they're wearing blackface. So it's not going to happen. It's politically incorrect. In fact, some companies have tried to introduce a little bit of tanning or thing. And by the time you put enough in to be effective, you basically are mimicking blackface. And that's politically unacceptable. So even
So
though it makes total
understand
sense.
that. You meaning that it's a sunscreen that's black?
No,
I'm understanding.
no, I guess let me say, in order for you to block the blue, you have to put in something that has a very dark pigmentation.
Yeah.
And so when you put it on your face, it's like you're literally putting on black paint.
Okay, yeah, that's what I understood. Okay, I just want to make sure I understood.
Yeah. So because you look at it, someone with really dark skin has almost zero chance of getting basal cell skin cancer because their skin is designed to absorb the blue and prevent it from being causing a cancer cell thing. If you are light skinned and you
Right.
want to be in that kind of environment, you have to put on something that mimics the dark skin. And
Yeah.
that, like I say, that causes a real problem for the cosmetic industry. And on top of which, the other thing is the reverse is true. If you're sitting there and you're trying to generate vitamin D and you have very dark skin, then the last thing you need to do is be blocking it with all the makeups now
Right.
contain some level of SPF. Well,
Mhm.
someone who has very dark skin, she has almost zero chance of getting skin cancer, but she's already struggling at higher latitudes to generate enough vitamin D. And so you get this double-edged sword going on in the women's cosmetic world
Mhm.
that, someone with very dark skin has no business having an SPF on their face. Just doesn't
There,
make any sense.
I used to work in the skincare industry and I worked for this one brand, and there was one foundation left in all the lines of foundation that they had. There was one line left that was the oldest foundation that they had that didn't have sunscreen. Every other foundation that they had kept coming out with, that like the newer and newer and newer, and then this one stayed. It was all They all had sunscreen, and they did have a version of the original with sunscreen, of course. And I do believe that is now a discontinued foundation. You just, it is very, very hard to find makeup that does not have sunscreen. I do not wear makeup anymore. I have not wore a full face of makeup and I can't even remember how many years. But certainly when I was wearing makeup, it was at the time I knew nothing about this. This was so many years ago, like 15 years ago. And it was like when I was selling, make sure that they have a sunscreen. And if they don't buy a foundation with a sunscreen, then you make sure you sell. There was something else we could sell. So they had a sunscreen layer and then their makeup on top. Like it was just,
Yeah, well, I think we're kind of at this inflection point where the dermatologist went way over here.
yeah,
You know, if I don't do this, you're going to get this, that, and the other. And now we're coming back. But I mean, the idea that they would put SPF in makeup that someone who has very dark skin is just it's ludicrous. I mean,
yeah.
in my opinion, you know, they can do whatever they want, but it's very hard. And we had exactly the same problem. One of the things I like about doing the optics of the body is that we can have a very frank conversation about the difference between people with dark skin and light skin. And one of the things, if you don't take that into account, you create these problems where women, like I say, with very dark skin at high latitudes, they can run around with no clothes on all day and they're still not going to generate enough vitamin D to be effective to do what they need to do. Now you're giving them a makeup that's blocking the UVB from coming into their skin. It makes no sense.
Damaging to
Yeah,
their,
we had the same thing with the oximeters during COVID. If you remember, there's some of what happened is the oximeters were calibrated for people with white skin, and they're looking at the infrared response of the differences to determine whether or not do you have sufficient oxygen in your blood. With person with dark skin, those numbers were different, but they used the same oximeter. So there were a number of people that had very low oxygen content that wasn't measured properly,
yeah.
that caused them to not get the treatment that they possibly needed. So I mean, one of the big things that we're finding is that the effect of skin color needs to be taken into account if you're going to think about, you know, someone who has very dark skin may be more or less susceptible to the effects of cortisol effects. You know, we don't know all those things yet.
Mhm.
But I hope it opens up a conversation to where people can kind of start questioning or asking the question, what for me, everybody should have, in a lot of ways, I think of it, everybody should have a regiment or a lifestyle that fits their needs. And it's not happening right now. And
Mhm.
makeup is a very simple example.
Yeah,
Mm, mm.
yeah. Well, that's,
Here's a question, if I can ask. Going from makeup, it makes me think of clothing.
Yeah.
You're wearing a hat, and before we got on, you said you mentioned that it allow the hat that you're wearing allows infrared through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is there different, like, Andia, if you know anything about her, and our audience does, she's very particular about what clothing she wears. She likes to wear really natural fabrics like cottons and wools and and I'm still learning about this. And I'm like you, I'm a work in progress because here I'm wearing some kind of artificial polyester. What I was just wondering, like things like polyester and fake fabrics, do they block the infrared? And should we be wearing more cottons to allow more through, or how does that work?
Well, if you look at what Bob did, he took an infrared light source, 850 nanometer LED, and he put a good English gentleman. He had his jacket, he had his sweater, he had his shirt, and he put those all on a hanger. And then he took his camera and he took some pictures. And lo and behold, 850 went all the way through all those stacks of clothing, the wool and cotton. And what I did is I did some transmission characteristics and looking at the near infrared transmission. And what you find is that most, well, even most color, let me just say, most fabrics are pretty similar from the standpoint that they all, once you get about to 800 nanometers or a little bit less, you get a transmission bump. And then if you look at that, that runs clear out to what you call the infrared, out to 3000 nanometers. So what you've got is now I did my straw hat, and it, lo and behold, has a very nice little peak. But, I keep on going back to my grandpa. My grandpa, was in his 90s when he died, and he had his mind all the way through. But his life was he'd go out, when it was lunchtime, he'd go sit underneath a tree. He'd have a pair of overalls on, cotton shirt, long sleeve, straw hat, and he'd sit in the shade, for lunch, right at the peak of the thing, and then he'd go out and do work some more. So I mean, clothing in particular is very transparent in general to near infrared.
Okay.
And what's amazing is that if you take that shirt you have on or blouse you have on, and you were to look at it with near infrared, it would be white and be slightly transparent. And in fact, there was a big problem for Sony. They tried to introduce a camera that measured out into the near infrared, takes pictures, and they had to recall it because it was actually seeing through women's blouses. And so, you know, and it is absolutely amazing because what happens is that as you move into the near infrared, it's no longer melanin. Melanin, which is the pigment for your skin color, it goes to zero, about 800 nanometers. But if you look at, I had some friends, one gentleman who was from Ghana, Justice, and he allowed me to measure his transmission characteristics of his skin. And then I had William, who was Irish with a red hair and about as pale as you could get. And we did a
Fitzpatrick
comparison
1.
between, yeah, we did a
Yeah, versus
comparison for it.
Fitzpatrick 6.
Yeah. And we did a comparison. And by the time you get up and start into the infrared, their transmission characteristics through their body actually merged. And by the time you get into the longer wavelengths, we all have exactly the same look. We're black with white hair because the water is what's actually absorbing what's going on. So if you have a dry shirt on versus a wet shirt on, you'll get different characteristics. But in general, clothing is very transparent. You don't have to run around naked in order to get the benefit. You just have to get out and get a full exposure.
But clothing will block UVB. Like
Yeah, I mean that's one of the benefits.
But
Yeah.
but like so I'm wearing a linen, so you're saying like I will still absorb as long as it's natural fibers, I'll still be absorbing all the near infrared light and all those invisible light spectrum that is healthy outside.
I will tell you that my wife is just like you. She likes natural fabric. So of
Yeah.
course it's the best thing for you to have. But
Yes.
in reality, from the optic standpoint, they're about
Doesn't
the
matter.
same.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
But what
From
about the
just the
wet?
optic standpoint. But from the feel and the look, it's better to have natural.
Okay, so you were saying it doesn't matter if it's polyester in there too. I see what you're saying. Okay, that's why I wanted to
Yeah.
make it clear. Okay.
And
One of the
what
things that
about
one of the
wet and
thing it did
dry?
is I took one of the things that I thought was really cool was we had this one company that could measure the entire solar spectrum almost. And what we did is we took a white T-shirt and a black T-shirt, and and they measured the transmission through those two things. It turns out that by the time you get to about 800, the black T-shirt was just as transparent as the white T-shirt. So it's kind of boring because everything's kind of white in the near infrared, so you can enjoy the colors. But yeah,
Can I
it
ask
doesn't
about,
matter.
you mentioned wet and dry. Is it when it's wet, does it not transmit or
But when you get into the infrared, the main absorber is water.
yeah.
Okay, so the water in your skin, it makes you look almost like you're the blackest black you could think of. It really is, and it's amazing. It's what we call a black body emitter, and it's really amazing how it works. But yeah, I mean, if you take a blanket and get it wet and hold it up in front of you, you're not going to get very much transmission at the longer wavelengths. But if it's dry, it'll kind of look like a translucent white.
Mhm.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
Yeah, when you look at water, water is the most amazing molecule in the world, as far as I'm concerned. It does some amazing stuff. So
Yeah, you're in good company there. We love the topic of water and think
We'll have
very
to bring you back and
absolutely.
talk about
Well,
water.
well, yeah, I would just say that our science is really taking off right now with the help of like the Guy Foundation and other places like that, where they're actually looking at the fundamentals of water and finding that it's key to transferring electrons, things of that nature. It's just, to me, it's just absolutely fascinating. Don't pretend to believe it, to know it all about it. I just think it's a great time in science right now.
yeah, yeah, it really is.
Truly is. I've got one more only. I know, are we wrapping up or
Nope, go ahead.
gotta, okay. Really, just from an environmental perspective, wanted to ask you, we had actually Dr. Martin Moreed on recently.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, yeah. And well, there's one thing that, okay, I'm gonna ask this burning question and then I'll get to the dark sky. Don't let me
Okay.
forget. I actually had it here in the paper, Melatonin, the Optics of the Human Body. You mentioned here, as a final point from the optical perspective, there is a general misconception that existing artificial lighting is benign with flux levels too low to generate damage. Is Dr. Moreed, he indicated more that because the flux is so low, we don't have to worry so much about the blue in our artificial light. Do you know different from an optical perspective?
Well, I actually I like Martin a lot, so I'm not going to be negative towards Martin. But
No,
to say,
no, he's
but
amazing.
I also
Amazing.
know that he will disagree on this one
Okay,
because
it's good to
the
hear both
reality
sides.
is, yeah, no.
Yeah.
But part of the problem is that most of the circadian work is looking only at the average characteristics of melatonin and cortisol in the body. And so, the adage is that melatonin should be high in the evening, cortisol low. In the morning, cortisol should be high, melatonin should be low. That's fine if you're measuring every, I do use an analogy. If I take a tennis ball, I take a picture, I throw it up in the air, and I catch it, and I take another picture. Did the ball move? And that's exactly what's the problem with a lot of the circadian work is that, and that's why what I've been doing lately with these sweat biosensors, they are sampling every 3 minutes melatonin and cortisol simultaneously.
Mhm.
And what we're finding is that while the basic curves are right, embedded on top of that is all these spikes that are causing problems because they are contributing to basically driving some of the negative effects because it's cortisol that tends to be the spikier of the two, and melatonin tends to be more averaged out. Blue, in particular, is a great alerter. You know, you have a lightning strike. There's a lot of blue in a lightning strike, and it gets cortisol going. Adrenaline peaks and cortisol peaks, and so you can literally with very low level. I mean, I can literally measure cortisol spiking on a TV which has less than 10 lux in a dark room. So you have to be dark adapted and all that, but the body is used as over years. I mean, you think about it just from a logical standpoint. If all of a sudden there's a flash, you're 100,000 years ago, and there's a flash of something in the middle of the night, you're going to respond to it. It's
Mhm.
important that you respond to it. And so the body does. That hasn't changed. And all we've done now is we've created all these, as I said, thousands of suns inside of in our
Mhm.
home where you're constantly getting flashed with, you walk by a lamp, an incandescent, you're not going to have near the effect that you walk by an LED because it is peaking up the cortisol. And that part we know for sure. So I don't know that totally disagreeing with Martin, but blue, in my opinion, is you want to end the day with a candlelight or a fire or something that has a very warm, gentle thing. If you really want to sleep well, that's what I think. There's
Yeah.
a really one of the guys I know. He's tells everybody that okay, I want you to do this. For a week or even for 3 days. Wake up in the morning with the sun, go outside, go back at night. Don't allow any light other than a candle. Just try it and go to bed. If in 3 days you don't feel some effect, you probably, that may just be you, but most people feel an effect. And, so I would argue that the blue that we've introduced, I had a neighbor, she had one of these LED fluorescent lamps on the outside. You know, she couldn't turn it down if she wanted to. So it'd sit there and blare all night and bounce around and get in. There are lots of people that, blue at night is a big issue. But it's not because blue is bad, it's because they can't dim it. One of the things that people don't realize is that when we were in the incandescent days, you had the little phase shift dimmers that you got on the side that you could take the light way down low, very romantic type thing. Try and do that with an LED. It doesn't dim. It's very
Yeah.
hard to get those colors to come down into the low level. And bear in mind, direct sunlight to dark is 9 orders of magnitude. So having a little dimmer on your LED lamp that lets you dim it down by 10% is almost irrelevant. But what it should be doing is you should be cranking everything down. You should be able to drive it down. And that's what our lights basically do is we put a combination of LED and incandescent in the same bulb and it dims down. It goes just to incandescent. So anyway, but you wanted to light it, artificial light at night. Were you talking about that?
Well, just you've said it. I can tell you're a dark sky advocate, right? And
Oh,
it's a new,
yeah,
I
yeah,
love that
yeah. I
term. It's
mean,
new to me.
yeah, no, I mean, I think that they're really trying very hard. I mean, it started out with just something I want to see the stars because I grew up in Kansas, I saw the stars every night. I'm in
Mhm.
New Jersey. You don't see the stars hardly at all. And you got to go a long way. So I think that, and a part of it, I think a good portion of this is that if you look at the space studies that they've done, up there at space station, they're seeing that not only we used to be, you look at a big city, it'd be kind of sodium vapor, kind of orangish red or incandescent or something like that. Now what's happening is all going to LED and it's becoming bluer and bluer and bluer. And now they're trying to pull it back down a little bit. But what they're finding is that is negatively reflecting not only us, but it's negatively affecting animals, insects. We're having pollination rates that are dropping dramatically because they're pulling the bugs away. Most of the pollination occurs at night. Now, if you got these lights in there, the bugs are confused. It's not a good scene in a lot of ways. And I hope that part of this, what we're trying to do is trying to show the underlying mechanisms, and the more mechanisms we know, maybe we'll. I notice you have your blue blockers on and all that kind of stuff. And you know, you should not. I guess I put my only caveat to artificial light at night is
Okay.
if we could dim it enough, it probably wouldn't matter much. If we should not have to give up blue content when I'm reading a storybook to my grandchild or whatever. Having a blue blocker on that takes out the blue and the yellows and just gives me a sort takes all the illustration. It's kind of like I say, go look at Van Gogh's Starry Night with the blue blockers on. You know, it does it's kind of like yuck. But so I would argue that it's not fair that everybody needs to wear blue blockers. If they had good lighting, they wouldn't need to wear the blue blockers in the first place. So, and so it's
Well,
we've got kind of a toxic light source that you're trying to compensate for, is what I
exactly.
believe.
And
Right.
that actually is a great segue into your lighting. But before I go there, there's actually a Oregon Outback International Dark Sky Sanctuary out here, and I believe it's the southeastern part of Oregon, which is like they describe it as like half of New Jersey, is all completely dark.
Yeah, yeah, and
And
you know,
I know some people who are part of it, and I haven't went to. They have like I don't know if it's every quarter or twice a year or what it is, but they'll have a big camping event where everybody goes out.
yeah, and unfortunately, people immediately equate light with safety. And yet the
No.
studies show it's not true,
Mm, good
and that
point.
you can get just because you're well lit doesn't mean you aren't going to get mugged, type thing.
I love
So, I don't know.
Keep
But
the light on, or you're gonna, because then it'll keep people away. Like,
yeah,
okay.
but it's to me, it's a perfect example of what we're fighting with on the Lumen for Watt. I mean, Martin and I and Dave Keating, so we're part of putting together a petition to the DOE to try and prevent them from doing what they're trying to do, which is to force us into bluer and bluer lights.
Yep.
We know about
And
that. He highlighted that, and we both signed it. So
thank
we,
you. But now the question is can we get anybody to do anything about it? Government is very difficult to get, but the dark sky at night, it's one of those things that until people equate, it was easy to start because from the people were noticing the lack of stars. But now that there's all this health stuff coming in, and people are even getting even more excited about artificial light at night because they're beginning to realize that hey, our breast cancer rates are going up in cities where women are exposed to high levels of LEDs and things of that nature. And but until you get that people start equating health and a cost to health with energy savings, they'll always go. And what's amazing to me is that when you look at it optically, women are more susceptible. After children, it's women and then men, because you have actually literally thinner skin and you have less collagen in your skin. So you are more rays of the infrared get into your body further than a man. So I keep on saying, if your boyfriend goes out and buys a bunch of LEDs from Home Depot because it's saving him money, tell him he's an idiot and go get something that's a little bit
oh,
better. So,
oh my, got
yeah.
my argument now. Thank you.
But
No,
it is optically true. You guys, you're
That was
more in tune with, and you think about way back when men were hanging out, going and killing a cow or something. I don't know, but women were sitting out there in the fields, working the fields, and you have a different, way back when you have a different evolutionary path in some ways from an optic standpoint than men do. Now it's not the same, but it was then. So
interesting.
yeah.
Wow.
yeah.
Well, so I wanted to highlight on your Nira lighting. So I know that you talk about people just honing in on the visible spectrum. I've heard you say it a couple times, and when it comes to circadian lighting or healthier light bulbs, I'd like you to talk about, whether why you don't agree with that, and then also like these bulbs that are just one color, like red, orange. Like, what do you think of them?
Well, I mean, if you look at sunlight, and there's lots of different ways to look at sunlight, but if you look at the spectrum of sunlight, it's broadband.
Mhm.
It has dips in it, but you start in the UV and you ramp up in the blue and the green, and then it goes out way into the infrared. One of the problems with blue and other single colors is they're narrowband. So, I mean, let's say I have some process in the body that's using, as I said, different portions of the spectrum, but I give you a really intense peak one spot, and you call that equivalent to spreading it out over a larger set of wavelengths or colors. They're not the same.
No,
Now, can I absolutely say you're going to die tomorrow because you got exposed to it? No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that that's not what's in nature.
right,
Our light bulb is trying to mimic as much. We have a little bit of a blue spike in, because that's the way the LEDs work. But all we do is if you look at the entire solar spectrum, it needs blue, or it provides us with a lot of blue. Blue sky, you walk out on every day. How can blue be bad? Well, the blue in the sky has mostly near infrared, because if you actually take a measurement of it, it
Mhm.
goes way out into the near infrared. So I believe, people can argue with me, there's all kinds of people that are trying to do photobiomodulation at 650 nanometers and 850 nanometers and all these other things. Sunlight does all that, plus fills in, but does it over a spread spectrum, which
Mhm.
I think is much better for That's what we've evolved under. So now coming in and saying, I'm going to add a red, or I'm going to have some taper that goes down to maybe a micron. This really, the what we're finding is that there are every indication that the body uses the entire spectral area. Our lights are just simply, they're pretty stupid when you really think about it. They're just LEDs that does visible really well. And little filament bulbs like you used to have in your little flashlight, they actually are almost 100% efficient at generating the infrared. You put the two of them together in the same bulb, you get the closest match to the solar spectrum that's available. And what we're finding is that it used to be that people were, like I say, the red light therapy, the 850 nanometers, that was all important. But what we're finding is the longer wavelengths are even more important. And there's a lot more of them, is what it turns out to, if you really look at the number of
Mm.
photons that are being generated. And so that's what we do. Now, the unique thing about our bulb is that as you dim it, if you use it, our AC bulb, if you use our DC bulb, we just switches between LEDs on and LEDs off, basically, with a simple switch. So you can have day and night. And that's what a lot of people use. It's
So no dirty
DC.
electricity with that?
What?
Because it's DC, does that mean, because in the old lights, when we would dim them, we would be worried about dirty electricity.
Yeah, what
Just
this
wondering.
is, this has a little wall wart power supply that converts it into DC
DC,
that you
yeah.
plug into the wall, and then you
Okay.
can just flip between the two.
Mm.
And but no,
I could
and
take that
when
out.
you say dirty DC, well, I guess I want to understand what you said.
Well,
Dirty electricity, she
dirty
said.
electricity. So that would, I'm thinking that's not a factor then if it's if it's DC.
Well, that's, yeah. If you look at some
Yeah.
of the hospitals where they're dealing with sensitive equipment, they'll switch over to DC so it has no modulation. And
Right.
everybody
Yeah.
kept on pushing me to develop an AC one that you just screw in. So we developed another one. It has about 2 to 3% ripple on it. So
Okay.
it has some ripple, but it's only about 2 or 3%. And it is always less than the incandescent had over the years. So, when way back when, if you had a DC on a dimmer, it would have the same amount or less flicker on that. So, and
Okay.
that doesn't seem to bother most people. I was hoping that we could be able to get away with even a little bit more, but I had a really great customer that she tried it and tried both of them, and she found that the DC, she could tell the difference between when the AC was on versus the DC. So I actually redesigned the AC to have less ripple in it. So, but it's like I say, it's super simple. It takes advantage. LEDs do great at visible. They do lousy at infrared. Incandescents do great at infrared. And what we
Hmm.
did is
That's
we
right.
designed the bulb such that all of them are, the LED is driven at a very low level. The incandescents are driven at a low level so that they should all have 50,000 hours or more, and what we do with our bulb is if it breaks, send it back to us, we'll replace it, you know,
So
and as long as you tell us what went wrong and how you did what you saw, that's all I want to know. Because
Well, hey,
we're just a small company. We're trying to get this idea out to people, and we've been able to get to the point that it's really hard to manufacture things in the US, if you haven't noticed. And so doing it here, I think we're kind of unique in that particular thing, but makes our bulbs a little more expensive. So,
yeah. We'll have a link in the show notes for people to check them out. And yeah, I think we're at time here. So we,
can we ask the orange question? We were talking about this before you came on, Scott.
oh, remind
Um,
me
I,
what.
I- well, no, I think this was with Andy and I before you came on, was just a burning question. Like I think you may have said it talking about the blue blockers, but I currently have an orange bulb and I have a red bulb and because I'm trying to do it for circadian, but I'm having a hard time reading. I'm having to use reading glasses that I don't need in the daytime. So I'm excited to try your bulbs because I think I need some violet, some blue, like some other colors, maybe just dimming, maybe I'll be better to read with a dimmer light, or I just I need to go to an eye doctor and get reading
Yeah,
glasses.
I just suggest just try one of our desk lamps and try it in two different modes. I mean,
Okay.
I've had people that, you know, It's really one situation and one thing. It's got the LED, which gives you the blue content that I think you probably need. But it has a long tail in the infrared that goes way out. And the
Okay.
ratios are 3 to 1, which is much more than what just basically mimics what you get in the shade when you're under a shade tree, as far as the ratio of near
Okay.
infrared to visible.
Mhm.
And then the other switch is just incandescent, which is 10 to 1 as far as the amount of near infrared to visible. It's a little dimmer. You can't see as well with it, but it's great for a nightlight for kids to go to sleep and things like that. If they want to try it. Again, I'd prefer whatever you to get. Let me know if it works or doesn't work. I'm
Okay.
just as interested in the things that don't work as the things that are, because things are changing rapidly. And I've had, you know, the internet is a kind of a cruel place sometimes, and I've had some people complain about something or something like that. Rather than just give me a call, talk about it. You
Mhm.
know, it's a much easier to work through things, before you start calling people names, type thing.
Oh, for sure. Or do a bad review or something that affects you for
Yeah.
long term, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Great.
it's hard because the industry is not well equipped to measure in the infrared. So if you can't measure it, you can't understand it. And so most of the people that are looking at some of our stuff are ignoring the fact that that's not what we're doing. We're going out and giving you the longer wavelengths that you can't measure with your meter. So,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
it's just interesting process.
I think the more we learn from you and from others that one of the most important things about a light bulb is it needs infrared.
Yeah, and
So just don't use it. Use a candle, you know.
well, and to give you a perspective, I mean, the incandescent was about 10 lumens per watt.
Okay.
Halogens are about 10 lumens per watt. Our bulb does, I try and get it as close to the government limit, which is about 45 lumens per watt. Some of the people that are pushing these really blue, high intensity light sources, they're up at 100 to 150 lumens per watt. And the only way you can do that is you have to take what was this for sunlight and make it like that. I don't care how you slice it, that's the bottom line. You have to shrink the spectrum that we're exposed to if you're going to get lumens per watt up to those high levels. And I think it's a shame because I think it's hurting our kids.
Mhm.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
So
for
anyway,
that. That makes it, I know I learned some things today. So we always ask our signature question, which is, what does quantum healthy mean to you? How would you answer that today with
you
everything?
know, it's fascinating because I kind of poo-pooed quantum way back when because I thought, we don't even understand the basics. How are we going to go down to the quantum? And is it really? Honestly, I'm just amazed that once you look at the beauty and the intricacy, the elegance of what's happening with moving, thinking about just photons versus thinking about watts or something like that, as these little things that are moving around. And it's just opened up this entire world about how the body is using things with the little, when you see a picture of a cell, you see things that have periods in them, or, look like they have little lines drawn across them. Those are actually changing where light is going in ways that we don't really understand. And you can only understand them if you think of it in a quantum sense. And I do not express to be a quantum expert, but one of the beauties of working with some of the people some of them are. And you can ask the really dumb question and they can say, oh yeah, that might be why that's happening, type thing. Here's the quantum equivalent. And you're kind of going, oh, okay. But yeah, I mean, the body has all kinds of structures in it that can only be explained on a quantum level, and it will be very interesting to see when we start tearing all these things down. And first off, I was just trying to get people to think that light was important. Now you start looking at it and you say, hey, maybe we can do something about things, like cancers or addiction or whatever. Maybe we can do something if we truly understand the underlying mechanism. A cancer cell in particular scatters light in a much different way than a healthy cell does. So you can possibly think about localizing just by using the right wavelengths. You may be able to increase the amount of ROS in a cancer cell versus a healthy cell. Now, wouldn't that be something that you'd want to try and understand? I think so. And, but until you, like I say, you get to the quantum level, you're kind of just making an experiment, and trying to see a result, which is important, but you're not understanding the real mechanism underneath it. So anyway, sorry for the long yak.
No, that was wonderful. Like you said, we are in an exciting time for the science, and you are playing a huge role in helping all of us better understand that's exactly what this podcast is for. So thank you so much. And I know Laura wants to thank you for us as well.
I do, but first we need to make sure your website is niralighting.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you on social media? If people want to start to learn from you, or are you active on social media?
I do LinkedIn a lot.
LinkedIn, okay. And
but we're trying to start getting to that point. What would you recommend?
oh, I'm not the Instagram goddess here. Ask
Yeah,
Andy.
okay. But I mean, to a great extent, we've used the last year or so to try and figure out how to make the light and try and understand the mechanisms underneath it. Now we're starting to have people buying them in reasonable quantities. And we're hoping that people will buy some, try it, don't like it, send it back. I don't care. I do care, but I'm just trying to get people to be aware that we always start out the same thing. Go outside, sit under a tree, enjoy that. And I'm going to have to go inside because I'm getting rained on.
So. Oh. Do you have time for a thank you? Do you have to, or do you have to move?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, try to be as quick as I can. You mentioned that you were a generalist. I just want to say thank you for that, because I think it's paid off in so many things. Teaching us that visible only light is not equivalent to what we are exposed to in nature, and just the danger of infrared deficiency and the importance of balance in our exposure to light. I think you highlight that so well. Thank you for caring so much about lighting itself and advocating for the best artificial environment possible. And I know that a lot of your motivation is for our children. That came through today, that they can learn faster and live healthier lives was actually the last line, and I think in one of your research papers. Just want to highlight this aha. I got a few ahas today, but one I got was that subcellular melatonin is being created in sunlight, while circulating melatonin is created in the absence of light, and why it's so important to get both of those. And for being a blue advocate and a dark sky advocate. And just lastly, with Nira, your company, thank you for attempting to bring nature's light indoors.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry. The rain was getting a little bit much, so I had to move over.
Oh, you're good.
But think of all this infrared light you got while you were outside, and we didn't get it. We've got windows open. Maybe we're getting a little bit.
Oh, thank you so much, Scott, for being here.
Talk to you later.
Okay. Cheers.
We'll see everybody next time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking around at the end of this podcast. We want to thank our sponsor, Viva Rays, who allows for us to get this information to you. They offer top-of-the-line blue blocking glasses, which, as we know, are critical for our health these days for blocking artificial light at night. Over 90% of our time is spent indoors under artificial lights, and this puts us all prone to circadian rhythm disruption. You can use the code QuantumHealthy for a discount. Link is in the show notes.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakistmanwellness.com and Endia at endiaray.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.